Hey guys, Shane here. So welcome to this build through video of Bronco's 135th Horsa Mk.1 Glider. So this has been built for Armorama, and a big thank you to both Adam Mann and Jim Starkweather for giving me the opportunity to build this kit. So we're going to be taking a look at building, painting and weathering this kit, and as all aircraft kits, we're going to begin with the cockpit. So this is kind of new ground for me. I'm normally 135th scale armor guy, so this is quite exciting to try something different. However, this kit is going to be a very interesting challenge in some good regards and in some bad regards, and we're going to talk about them as we encounter them in this video. So I'm beginning to add the various spars to build up the cockpit and the pilot and co-pilot seats. There's one resounding theme in this build, and that is a lack of positive locator points, whether it be tabs or locator pegs for part alignment. Bronco really does not give us much to work with here, so this can be very tricky trying to align parts correctly. So this did take a lot of time to slowly start building and aligning parts to ensure that everything fits together. Just had to sand back some glue marks. I will be using several different glue brands in this build, as this type of build does require it. Also, I will be doing a lot of filling on this build. However, this is the only time I really film myself doing any filling work. This kit, you will notice many times throughout this video the amount of fill marks from this putty I'm using here. So I just thought I'd show it here. There is a lot of injector pin marks that do require filling. It's probably one of the most time consuming elements of this build. So now we're moving on to the control columns for the pilot and co-pilot. These are pretty nice little assemblies. They are pretty fragile. The plastic in this kit is generally brittle, so I would recommend being very careful removing parts. My blades were a little bit blunt when I was working on this, and it did make life a little bit dodgy for me, but luckily I didn't break any parts when I was removing them. Also very delicate little wing nuts here for the control yokes. I was actually very surprised I didn't lose these parts. Again, little details like that will make the big difference in this kit. It is a very well detailed kit, however it's not for the novice. So now we're moving on to some of the control surfaces. I think these are for the windbreaks, if you will. I was going to say throttles, but there's no engines on a glider, so I imagine these are for the windbreaks and the flaps. Again, my apologies for my somewhat crude assembly. I'm not the cleanest builder in the world, but it gets the job done. These assemblies are somewhat fragile in places, but they do build up to be very well detailed, and they actually are very exquisite once built up. One of the things I did find in this build at several times, and especially with some of the interior parts, is the instructions can be somewhat vague. They're well laid out until you start placing parts, and again, due to the lack of any positive locating points, it can leave you a little bit in the dark. A lot of time you're gluing especially in certain vital parts, plastic on plastic, and you're not entirely sure where you're actually meant to be lining parts up. And we're going to run into some pretty interesting challenges later on in this build because of this. However, Tamiya Extra Tin is a very handy asset in this build. It seems that the Bronco plastic reacts very quickly to adhesives full stop, but especially with Revell Contacta and Tamiya Extra Tin, both brands seem to react very quick with this plastic, so it does give us very quick bonds pretty fast, which is very important again, because often you have to visually align parts, and the less time you have to basically hold them in place, the better. And this is our cockpit assembly, all ready for priming and painting. Now I'm going to start moving on to probably the most tricky and annoying part of this build, and this is the cargo or troop compartment for the glider. And we're going to see here that these reinforcing bulkheads, or ribs if you will, are going to be a lot of hassle, and they might lead to a lot of problems later in this build series. So as you can see here, there's no real positive locating tabs, so the tolerances are so wide that they kind of loosely fit, and it's going to be very important to try to align these as straight and even as you can, as the cockpit is in, or the fuselage should I say, is in sections, and if these are not really done straight, they're not going to align. So I am somewhat apprehensive about this part later when we come to fit the fuselage sections to this this bulkhead work here, as Bronco tends just to kind of give you the slot, but the slot's wider than the actual bulkhead piece, so it's a little bit hard to actually figure out where things are meant to align, how far they're meant to set forward, etc. It is a bit disappointing about this build, and it will be a recurring theme and a recurring problem of this build. So again, rubber bands are pretty important. There is a bit of warpage in this, at least in my kit there was, so I used elastic bands to lock everything down and straighten out everything. I want pretty strong bonds here, so I'm using Revell Contacta. And again, you'll notice that in some of these ribs I've actually taken with a pencil and I've numbered them. I would strongly recommend you do the same. And I was going to lock them down with extra tin as it reacts very quickly, and I want to try to align it straight. So fast acting glue for fast alignment is probably a good recommendation of mine that I've learned from this build. As you can see here, they don't give you a lot to go on for aligning parts. I will say it again and again, and it is unfortunately just a part of this kit, and I've seen in other Bronco kits as well. So now we're mounting the cockpit or the crew compartment floor now to the actual bottom of the fuselage, which is all done in sections. Again, I actually struggle trying to align parts here. The kit comes with a counterweight that's meant to be inserted under this floor, which I haven't filmed because it doesn't fit. I actually had to take pennies and super glue them in the counterweight from that way. So the kit supplied counterweight, which is a big block of pig iron, basically doesn't fit. So this part was a little bit annoying trying to get everything to align. Again, the instructions were somewhat vague here. Again, that could be just my inexperience with aircraft, but I did somewhat have to study this quite a bit to make it work. And again, with the trusty elastic bands to make sure everything fits nice and snug. This is probably the biggest failure of the kit, is the joint between the two fuselage halves that make up the actual cargo compartment. There basically is no joint, so I had to use super glue and Contacta to basically bond the two fuselage sections together and the two floor sections that make up the lower fuselage. This is very disappointing. There was no way I could put bracing, as it's just plastic on plastic joint, and I've seen this happen in their, I think it was their Panzer III as well, type of just bare plastic joints. So in order to hide the super glue weld, I used Gorilla gel glue in this case. I'm just taking some sandpaper to blend this joint together. There might be a better way to do it, but at least with my skill set, that's what I came up with. So with the joint hidden between the lower fuselage, I'm going to start moving on now to the large access door on the side of the fuselage, which is a large drop down hatch. You can model it open or closed. You have to kind of figure out which way you want to do it first. And once again, I have to fiddle around here a little bit trying to get things to align properly, because there is no, again, positive location points, so things can slide and misalign if you're not careful, so do watch out for that. Also, which I noticed when I was doing research for this, there's no hinge for this door. So again, they'll just have you, if you want to model this large side hatch open, it sits right behind the cockpit. There's meant to be a large hatch. They didn't, or a large hinge assembly, should I say. They didn't include this. They just want you to glue it to hard plastic and just pretend that there's a hinge there. So you might want to scratch build it. I do, from what I understand, Eduard's photo etch set for this kit does have the hinge included in their set, so you do have options. It is a bit bizarre that Bronco would forget to add this detail. And again, just having to align parts that have no positive locators. Again, it's awkward. That's the best way I can place it. It's awkward. It isn't as big a problem, and it doesn't take the enjoyment away from the kit, but there are times you're asking yourself, why did they do it this way, or why did they tool it this way? And I can't really answer. I don't know. I think this might be in the just whatever type of technology they have. So now we're moving on to our very large landing gear. So these are 2-part plastic, as you can see, and I'm basically trying to push the plastic cement up through the joint. And what I'll do then is I'll sand it down and hide the seam that way. They have a nice bulge and weighted effect to them, which is a pretty nice addition. So I'm just trying to hide the seam between the two halves with a bit of contact and extra tin, and then I'll sand it all back, and hopefully we'll get a realistic finish that way. So now we're moving on to the landing gear struts, as well as the shock absorber and skid assemblies. Again, there had to be pin marks that had to be filled and sanded back, which is pretty the norm on this kit, would appear. Again, this assembly goes very quick without a hitch. It's very self-explanatory. I just had to touch up a pin mark there that I'd not properly sanded back. Nice thing about these liquid putties, you can just dip your finger and wipe away the excess. It's a quick way of filling small imperfections. So now we're moving on to the fuselage sections that will make up our fuselage, and that might cause us all the problems in the next episode of this video if things go wrong. So all the many portholes on the crew compartment are all separate parts. So I'm just going to start gluing these in. It's a bit time consuming, but once you get into the rhythm of it, it goes through pretty quick. And again, you can see I've already with a pencil marked out which part is what, or it'll get confusing. There are pin marks on the inside of these too, which might be a problem later on, as there is like quite a comprehensive internal lattice work of struts inside the interfaces of these sections. So I'm not entirely sure how you could sand those back without sanding and destroying that detail. So now we're moving on to the tail assembly, and what I've done here is I've just sellotaped the tail sections together so I can ensure I get a proper alignment for these bulkheads. And what I'll do here is I'll only glue them on one side, so I can pull these apart and have the bulkheads in place on one side. I can paint them up and then glue them back together when we want to start painting the exterior. We have our bulkheads aligned, so they should work just fine. Now we're moving on to our control surfaces, which are, in this case, our stabilizers for the tail section. The fit on these will not be great. I'll have to come back and hide the seams with filler off camera. But at least they do have probably one of the few positive locator parts, which is that large spar there that you can slide the two stabilizers in. That's probably the only time that they actually give you something to align parts with, which is a bit bizarre, but I'm glad they did it, because if they didn't line up correctly, you'd have droopy stabilizers and the glider would look ridiculous if they didn't line up correctly. Just using some trusty close pegs to ensure that everything fits well together. Now moving on to the rudder, which is absolutely massive. Again, this will need a little bit of filling too, just to hide the seam between the two halves, but by using rubber bands and close pegs, it does minimize it somewhat. Adding the flaps. These are workable, so make sure you don't accidentally glue the hinges together. These turned out to be a little bit fiddly actually to get in place. It took me a couple of goes to get them to slide in without them falling apart. So in the end I just came up with this way. I would just lie the part on one part of the hinge and then add the upper part of the flap and lock it in place that way. Again, just adding some more details to the tail section. So with the Horsa Mk.1, you could drop the tail section off once the aircraft or the glider landed. So there is a point for adding this detail if you want to model it on the ground and the tail section removed, which that's how I'm going to do it. So now we're coming into the wing spar and the main wing assemblies, and this is where most of the trouble I've had with this kit so far have arisen, and I just hope it's not a sign of things to come. So far so good, everything kind of goes together pretty well at this point. This is the main wing spar. The instructions are quite busy and they're not entirely that clear on the proper position of parts. And again, there's no proper alignment, so a lot of these parts can go in several different shapes and different directions if you're not careful. So things start to kind of get a little bit dodgy from here on in, and a lot of filler and a massive amount of sanding is going to be required. Now again, that could have been me and my pretty butcher style of building kits. You know, if you're a more precision builder and you're more exacting on your tolerances, I'm sure you could avoid this. However, I did find it kind of difficult to get parts to align without dirty seams appearing. So there's a small amount of lattice work included here, so what I'm going to do is I'm only going to build one wing and display with one wing and then have the lattice work exposed on the other side. Just for simple fact being, is this model so big I could never actually display it any other way. you'll see in a few moments how large actually the wingspan is, even just like with one wing on. So it's nice that this detail is included, but if you want to model damage on your wings, you're going to have to scratch build that yourself. Now this is where I start coming into problems, is these assemblies here, which are the lower surfaces of the wing. So these are all multi-assemblies, as you can see, and they can kind of align several ways, and the instructions again are a little bit lacking in the sense that you're not entirely sure where the hell they're actually meant to sit in relation to the wing spar or the control spars beneath it. And then I've mounted one wing. I didn't really film me putting the two wing halves together, as there was a lot of swearing and cursing involved, because there was a lot of sanding and a lot of dirty gaps that needed filling, and I'm getting nightmares even thinking about it. So this is a very cut down version of me sanding. In real life it was about a week of sanding and filling here, and it's still not going to be perfect. I know I'm going to have big dirty seams and all the guys in Armorama are going to laugh at me, but we try our best. So this is probably the biggest letdown of the kit, was the wing assembly, and I hope that's just the only one. But again, if you're a bit more careful than I was, and you're a bit more experienced, and your ability to get good tolerances out of kits is more precise, I'm sure it probably won't be a very big issue for you. So as you can see, even with one wing, it's pretty immense. And here's our wing section. There is posable flaps which didn't fit. I had to sand them down to get those to fit. We have our tail section. Then our actual tail itself. And we have our crew compartment or cargo bay. Again, there's some dodgy alignments on that. Our airframe parts. We do have some very nice rib detail on the inside, and there are pin marks in that, so I'm not sure if I can actually fill those without losing anything. We have our hatches and doorways and the cockpit. So I'm going to leave them all in these sub-assemblies, and in part 2 we're going to come back, prime them, paint them, put them all together, and we'll just see how well the fuselage sections come together. Hopefully it won't be too bad, but we'll see what happens in part 2. So thank you for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe, happy modeling, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.